After being on an 11-game losing streak, the San Antonio Spurs are now on a 2-game winning streak. What's up, everyone? This is Paul Garcia, Project Spurs. If you watched the game on Saturday, the Spurs defeated the Miami Heat on the road in Miami by 4 points in a very close win. The Spurs were able to execute and hold on in crunch time, and so they got their second win in a row after being again on that 11-game losing streak. Let's go ahead and jump right into this game between the Spurs and the Heat. So before tip-off, what was the scenario for this game? So the Spurs were still without two members of their starting lineup, Jakob Poeltl and Jeremy Sohan. They were both still on the injured list. The Heat were actually favored by 12. When I had last checked the Vegas odds, they were favored by 12. So again, the Spurs were the underdog. They ended up winning this game. All right, so let's go through a quick recap of this game. And as you can see here, it was a very close game throughout the entire night. Miami's biggest lead was 8 against San Antonio, and then the Spurs' biggest lead was just 5 points. So again, a very close game back and forth between both teams. So let's go through a quick recap here. So the first 6 minutes, the Heat are up by 2. Keldon Johnson showed that he was going to continue to attack the defense, the interior defense. He mentioned post-game after the last game that he wants to start attacking inside out, so he's going to continue to drive the ball more often now and try to get at the rim instead of taking the three-point shot, which is where he had been struggling before. And so Keldon showed that he was going to be a force again in the paint against this Heat defense. By the end of the first quarter, the Heat are up by 4 points. Roby and Doug McDermott each had Isaiah Roby and Doug McDermott each had 5 points off the bench at this point for San Antonio. Then in the second quarter, in the first 6 minutes, Devin Vassell gets going off the bench. He came off the bench here after being on the injured list in the game before. He ends up going on an 8-0 scoring run by himself. And then when halftime comes, the Spurs are actually up by 2. Jimmy Butler was being a problem for San Antonio's defense, especially scoring inside and getting to the free throw line. He had 17 points by this point. But we do want to note that the Spurs were showing by halftime that they were able to get into the paint and score against the Heat defense very efficiently. At halftime, the Spurs were making 82% of their paint shots, and as you're going to see, that trend continued as the game went forward. In the third quarter, the Spurs were only down by 4 midway through the third quarter. Here and then let's see here. Yeah, Tyler Hero actually was making some threes there, and so the Heat were doing pretty well there. But again, it was just a 4-point lead, and I don't know why it says 2 there for the Spurs. It says Heat by 4 midway to the third quarter. Okay, I was looking at the wrong numbers. Then by the end of the third quarter, the Spurs are up by 2. By this point, Keldon Johnson has continued to score the ball. He has 19 points for San Antonio to lead the way. Then in the fourth quarter, it's a close game still. The first 6 minutes, Romeo Langford is able to get his career high. He at this point, he had been scoring most of the night. And then at this point, in the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, Langford reaches his first career high, 17 points. Before that, it was 16 points. He had twice with the Celtics. So he's having a good scoring night. We're going to talk about him a little bit later, Langford for the Spurs. And then finally, in those final crunch time, I mean, the Spurs didn't have a good record here. They were like 2-6 entering crunch time. They stepped up. They were just battling back and forth every time Miami scored. They had an answer, especially Devin Vassell. There was some crucial buckets where the Heat defense really took away everything for San Antonio, and so Devin Vassell had to go one-on-one and get some of his step-back mid-rangers against the Heat defense, and he made those shots. Those were some very clutch shots for Devin Vassell in those final few minutes of the fourth, and so the Spurs were able to hold on in crunch time and execute, and again, keep scoring with Miami, and so they hold on for that 4-point win as underdogs. All right, so who are the leading scorers for this game for the Spurs? Continues to be Keldon Johnson, as we note here. I mean, you just look at his paint scoring. He's continued to take this approach of inside-out scoring, where he's going to just basically drive against the defense, and so he's not taking as many three balls anymore. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit in terms of the Spurs' scoring from 3, and their shot volume has gone down now that Keldon's attacking. But hey, Keldon's been efficient, at least when he's attacking the basket. You're going to see it a little bit in some of his numbers. So he ends up with 14 of his 21 points in the paint, and of course, by doing that, he's by being aggressive and going to the rim, you're going to get to the free throw line. And so he was able to do that with 7 made free throws. Langford, like I mentioned, a career high now, 19 points. Again, he was also being like Keldon, attacking the interior defense of the Heat. Langford ends up with 12 paint points for San Antonio. And then he also made a 3-pointer, and he also got 4 points on the free throw line. Devin, like we mentioned, came off the bench because he was just returning from injury. So he ends up with 18 points on the night, and his crucial makes were from that mid-range area, 6 points, especially there in crunch time. Zach Collins had a very efficient game, 16 points as the starting 5, 8 points against the Heat defense on the interior in the paint. He really took advantage of mismatches. They really, the smaller guards, Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, they really couldn't contain him whenever Bam Adebayo got switched off of Zach. And so Zach ends up with 16 points. Doug McDermott with a strong game off the bench with 13 points, 9 points from the 3-point line. And then Trey Jones there in the starting unit with 10 points and six made free throws. And again, some of those crucial ones did come down the stretch as the game got really close. For the Heat, their leading man was Jimmy Butler, scoring the ball with 30 points. Again, continuing to attack the Spurs defense inside with 22 paint points and 8 free throws. Tyler Hero got the 3-ball going for Miami, where he ends up with 15 points from the 3-point line, 23 points overall. Then they had Caleb Martin with 14 points, Kyle Lowry 12, Bam 12, and Victor Oladipo with 11 points. When we look at the scoring battle, we see here that a huge area for the Spurs was at mid-range. They outscored Miami 16-2 in the non-paint 2. And yes, the Heat won the 3-point line by 18 points, but again, it was at mid-range. That was a big gap for San Antonio. And then they also won the paint by 4 points and the free throw line, so they end up winning the game by 4 points. Were the Spurs. Now, when we look at the shot chart, so what I mentioned earlier was that at halftime, the Spurs were making 82% of their paint shots. And again, that trend continued even into the second half, because for the game, they ended up making 75% of their paint shots, which is a new season high for San Antonio in paint accuracy. I know they didn't get a lot of shots there, just 46% of their shots came from the paint. But again, when they got there, they were making them efficiently, and that was a big key for them winning this ball game. As far as let's see here. And then for the Heat, on offense, they had a good night shooting from the 38% of their 3-point makes went in. And then also in the paint, they scored well, 61% of their makes. But again, the big gap in scoring here was the fact that the Spurs won the 2-point battle by 18 points. The Heat won the 3-point battle by 18 points, but then the Spurs won the free throw line, surprisingly, by 4 points. And so that was the big difference there for the teams. The Heat did get out of the break with 17 points, and then points out turnovers. Also, the Heat had an edge there. All right, so who are your 3 standout players? And we throw in all the numbers and see who ended up being some of the three best players for San Antonio this game. Zach Collins had one of his best games as a Spur. He plays 30 minutes as starting 5. He ends up with 16 points on just 7 shots, collects 8 rebounds, 2 assists. He did have 6 fouls, and I would say that last one was really questionable. I mean, all he did was just set a screen, and then they called a foul on him, an offensive foul, and he ended up having to leave the game in crunch time. He did have 4 turnovers, but then he also had a block. Like we mentioned, Romeo Langford had probably one of his best games as a Spur, 29 minutes, 19 points starting on just 10 shots. So again, career high 19 points for Romeo on just 10 shots, 6 rebounds, 3 fouls, 2 steals, 1 block, and 1 steal. 2 turnovers, should I say. And then Devin off the bench, again, just coming off the injured list, 26 minutes, only 13 shots. He ends up with 18 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 foul, 3 steals, a team high 3 steals, and just 1 turnover for Devin there in this game off the bench. All right, so now that this is 26 games for the Spurs that they have played, what were some good and bad things when you look at their offense in this game compared to others? The good, I know that this doesn't sound great, but if you've watched these videos, numerous times, you know that I mentioned the stats. So the Spurs were, before Saturday, 0-14 when losing the 3-point line. They had never won a game this year when they lost the 3-point line to their opponent. Well, that losing streak ended tonight with the Spurs are now 1-14 when losing the 3-point line. So again, they finally ended that streak. The Heat did win the 3-point battle by 18 points, but San Antonio still had enough with the 2-point scoring and the free throw scoring to outwork that. And so they end up with the 1-14 record. Again, it's not a great record, but it's still it's a win, and they ended that losing streak. The 75% paint accuracy, like I mentioned, is a new season high. They made 24 made free throws, which was their second most this season. Their career high their season high is 32 this season. 32 made free throws for the Spurs. They tied their mid-range scoring with 16 points. And normally, yes, the mid-range is not a great shot that you want to take as a team, but on a night where you're struggling from the 3-point line, and also it's a very close game throughout, mid-range scoring can be important in those moments when it's a very close game. And you're not having to come back from a big deficit. So again, that worked out for San Antonio. And then again, not a great record in crunch time, 3-6, but hey, that was their 3rd win in crunch time. And you just want to give some credit to the Spurs. They didn't collapse. There was times when it looked like Miami might come back in those final 5 minutes, but the Spurs again just continue to match Miami in scoring, and they did get a few stops there. They're late in the game, and again, you want to give some credit there to Devin Vassell for making some key buckets for San Antonio. What were some key, some of the not so good stats on offense for San Antonio in this one? Just 21 points from the free throw line. We do want to note that their volume has gone down. Just 27% of their shots were from 3, so that's a season low in terms of percentage of shots from 3. Again, a big part of that is that their number 1 3-point taker is Keldon Johnson. He usually takes about 6 to 8 a night. He only took 2 now because again he's just really focusing on scoring inside more so than the 3-point line. So when you're losing, you're basically losing his shot volume from the 3-point line until he feels more comfortable getting that shot back in his shot arsenal. So that's going to probably show in the entire team stats, is the fact that they really just rely now on 3-point shooting for Devin Vassell, Doug McDermott, and Josh Richardson. They have to make a huge chunk of those 3-pointers for the Spurs if Keldon is going to start playing more so inside. They also had 24 assists, which was pretty low for them for San Antonio. 57% assist percentage was low, and then out on the break, they only had 11 fast break points. So again, not too much negatives there on offense. On defense, the Spurs had another good night here against the Heat defense. When we look at how they had a pretty good night also against Houston in their most recent game. So one thing we do want to note is that the Spurs avoided a double-digit deficit in this game. They only fell behind by 8, and that's the first time they've been able to not fall behind by double digits in back-to-back games. The last time that happened was way back in October 30th. So again, against Houston, they only fell behind by 7, and now against Miami, they only fell behind by 8. So again, they're not having to try to dig back out of these deep holes of like 10, 15 points. So again, they're able to keep these games close, so then they have a good chance of winning, like we've seen here in these last 2. One thing we want to note, it's because it doesn't happen very often for the Spurs defense, is that they held the Heat below 30 points in all 4 quarters. So again, the Heat still scored over 100 points, but again, that's a win for San Antonio. The fact that their defense isn't giving up 30 plus point quarters. It was only the third time they've actually done that this season, held an opponent below 30 in all 4 quarters. The Heat only had 50 paint points, which is also low for a Spurs opponent. The Heat scored just 111 points. That sounds like a lot, but again, the Spurs normally give up 120 a night, so that's actually a good night defensively for San Antonio. The Spurs forced the Heat into 80% of the Heat turnovers were because of Spurs steals. So now that's a new season high in percentage of opponent turnovers from Spurs steals. So again, 8 out of 10 steals for Miami. 8 out of 10 turnovers for Miami came from Spurs steals. The Spurs also cashed in on those steals, on those turnovers for the Heat, and converted them into points. Every time the Heat turned it over, their average was 1.20 points per turnover for the Spurs. They scored on the other end. And then they also kept the Heat off the boards. The Heat had just 5 offensive rebounds and 7 second chance points. So they did a good job of not allowing Miami many second chance points. The not so good, it wasn't a lot of negatives here either. The Heat made 20 free throws. Again, my bad on the spelling here. It says Mater, I don't know why. The Heat also just had 10 turnovers. So again, that was just a low amount of turnovers for them. And then the Spurs because the Heat only had 10 turnovers, the Spurs were only able to score 12 points off those turnovers. All right, so now we're the Spurs through 26 games. They are now 8-18 overall, still 14th out west, but their chances at a number 1 pick have decreased. They've now gone from 4th worst record to 5th worst record with the wins, and that's kind of the give and take. Now, when they lose games, they're going to increase their lottery odds, but when they win games, they're going to decrease them. And again, it's still very early this season. It's only 26 games. They're 4-8 on the road, so a better record on the road, I believe, than at home. And then for some reason, this team just continues to play well against the East. There hasn't been many games, but when they do play the Eastern Conference, they're having success right now. 5-2 in a very small sample size against the East. So again, that's winning basketball right there. And then they also won back-to-back. You just want to know that they won back-to-back games after being on that 11-game losing streak. All right, so up next, the Spurs are done for this week, but now next week, starting on Monday, they return to action again at home against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Come to town in San Antonio. They are 17-10 as of Saturday evening. They're the 3rd best team in the East. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs host the Portland Trailblazers, who are 13-12 this season right now, and 9th out west. And then, even though it's a home game for San Antonio, the Spurs are actually going further down south to Mexico. In Mexico City, they're going to play the Heat one more time. The Heat, of course, we know after this loss are 12-15 and 10th in the East. So again, at least the Spurs now have that confidence that they've been able to beat the Heat, especially almost like pretty much the Heat were almost like a full straight if we look at the injury reports for both teams. So Spurs win back-to-back games. We'll see what happens on Monday now against the Cavs. For Project Spurs, I am Paul Garcia. Have a great evening.